Good morning, everyone. It is a blessing to wake up each day with the gift of life. Each morning is an opportunity to grow, to seek God's guidance, and to walk in His ways. However, there are certain habits we may unknowingly develop that displease God. Today, I want to share with you 4 morning habits that anger God, habits we should avoid so that we can start each day in alignment with His will. My friends, every morning we wake up is a gift from God. The very breath in our lungs, the beating of our hearts, the light of a new day. These are not things we have earned, but blessings we have received. And yet, how often do we open our eyes and go about our day without acknowledging the one who gave it to us? How often do we rush into the worries of life, the responsibilities, the distractions, without stopping to thank the one who holds it all together? It is a tragedy, my friends, that so many wake up and neglect the presence of God. They wake up and reach for their phones before they reach for their Bibles. They wake up and check the news before they check in with the Lord. They wake up and plan their day before they have asked God to guide their steps. And in doing so, they begin their day unarmed, unprepared, and disconnected from the very source of life. Imagine a soldier going into battle without his armor. Imagine a traveler setting out on a long journey without a map. Imagine a child trying to walk on his own, ignoring the hand stretched out to help him. That is what happens when we wake up and fail to acknowledge God. We step into a world full of challenges, temptations, and uncertainties, yet we do so without the covering of prayer, without the wisdom of His Word, without the strength that only He can provide. The Bible tells us to pray without ceasing. It tells us to seek Him early, to acknowledge Him in all our ways, and He will direct our paths. Yet so many of us live as if we can handle life on our own. We think we are strong enough, wise enough, capable enough to navigate the day without Him. But my friends, we are not. We were never meant to walk this road alone. We were created for fellowship with God. We were created to depend on Him, to commune with Him, to find our strength in Him. And when we neglect that, we are not just missing out on a blessing. We are grieving the very heart of God. Do you think God does not notice when we ignore Him? Do you think He does not long to hear our voices in the morning? Just as a father delights in the words of his children, so too does God delight in our prayers. He does not need them, but He desires them. He does not require our words, but He longs for our hearts. And when we begin our day without Him, we are not just robbing ourselves of His presence, we are shutting the door on the one who loves us more than we can comprehend. There is a story in the Bible of a people who forgot God. They went about their lives, they built their cities, they made their plans, but they did not acknowledge the Lord. And what happened? Their hearts grew cold. Their paths became crooked. They wandered further and further from the truth until they found themselves lost, empty, and broken. My friends, we are no different. When we push God aside, even in something as small as neglecting to seek Him in the morning, we begin a slow drift away from Him. We may not notice it at first, but over time, our hearts become distant, our faith becomes weak, and our lives become filled with unnecessary burdens because we have chosen to carry them alone. But the good news is that it does not have to be this way. God is always waiting. His arms are always open. His mercies are new every morning. And no matter how many times we have neglected Him, no matter how many mornings we have rushed into our day without a thought of Him, He is always ready to welcome us back. All it takes is a simple prayer, a simple moment of surrender, a simple decision to say, Lord, today I choose you first. And when we do that, everything changes. Our perspective shifts. Our burdens lighten. Our worries fade in the presence of His peace. Because when we start our day with God, we are reminded that we do not walk alone. We are reminded that He goes before us, that He fights our battles, that He supplies our needs. We are reminded that no matter what the day brings, we are held in the hands of a faithful and loving Father. My friends, let us not be people who wake up and forget God. Let us not be people who take His blessings for granted. Let us be people who seek Him first, who acknowledge Him in all we do, who begin each day with gratitude and prayer, because when we do, we will walk in His strength, we will move in His wisdom, and we will live in the fullness of His love. God is calling us back to Him. He is calling us to rise each morning with our hearts set on Him. Will we answer that call? Will we choose Him first? Will we start each day in His presence, knowing that without Him we are nothing, but with Him we have everything? The choice is ours, but one thing is certain. When we choose to seek Him, He will always be there, ready to meet us, ready to bless us, ready to walk with us every step of the way. And that, my friends, is the greatest gift of all. Every morning we wake up is a new opportunity, a chance to draw closer to God, to walk in His ways, and to seek His presence before anything else. But too often, we allow the world to shape our mornings instead of allowing God to. We wake up and immediately focus on our worries, our schedules, our problems. We fill our hearts with negativity, and without realizing it, we push God aside. How many of us start our day with complaints? How many of us wake up and the first thing we do is grumble about what we don't have, about what went wrong yesterday, about what troubles lie ahead? Instead of thanking God for another day of life, we focus on what we wish was different. We focus on our struggles, on our disappointments, on the things we cannot control. And in doing so, we miss the opportunity to see God's blessings right in front of us. Complaining is dangerous. It may seem small, it may seem insignificant, but it is a seed that grows into bitterness, into dissatisfaction, into unbelief. When we complain, we are telling God that what He has given us is not enough. We are saying that His provision is not sufficient, that His grace is not adequate, that His blessings are not satisfying. And my friends, that does not please God. The Israelites in the wilderness were a people who had seen the power of God with their own eyes. They had watched Him part the Red Sea. They had seen Him provide manna from heaven. They had witnessed miracles beyond imagination. And yet they still complained. They still grumbled about what they didn't have. They still doubted His plan. And because of their complaining, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Never stepping into the fullness of the promise God had for them. How many of us are wandering in our own wilderness today because we have chosen to focus on our problems instead of God's promises? How many of us are delaying the blessings God has for us because we are too busy complaining about what we don't have instead of being grateful for what we do? The Bible tells us to give thanks in all circumstances, to rejoice always, to praise God in every situation. Gratitude is not just a suggestion, it is a command. It is a weapon against the enemy. It is a key that unlocks joy and peace in our lives. When we wake up and choose to thank God instead of complain, we shift our focus from what is wrong to what is right. We remind ourselves that no matter what is happening around us, God is still good. He is still in control. He is still faithful. And when we live with gratitude, we begin to see things differently. The burdens that once seemed overwhelming become lighter. The problems that once consumed us lose their power. The things we once took for granted become sources of joy. Gratitude changes everything. It does not mean that life will be easy. It does not mean that we will never face difficulties. But it means that even in the midst of hardship, we can trust that God is working all things together for our good. But there is something else that many of us do each morning that turns our hearts away from God. It happens so easily, so subtly, that we don't even realize it. We wake up and the first thing we do is fill our minds with things that do not honor God. Instead of turning to His Word, we turn to our phones. Instead of starting our day with prayer, we start it with distractions. We watch, we listen, we consume things that add nothing to our faith, that do not bring us closer to God. What we put into our hearts in the morning shapes the rest of our day. If we fill our minds with negativity, we will carry that negativity with us. If we consume things that promote sin, our thoughts and actions will begin to reflect that sin. But if we start our day with God, if we fill our hearts with His Word, with worship, with prayer, then we walk in His presence, in His strength, in His peace. There is a reason the Bible tells us to meditate on His Word day and night. There is a reason it says to fix our eyes on what is pure, on what is lovely, on what is good. Because what we focus on, we become. If we set our minds on the things of God, we will walk in His Spirit. But if we allow the world to fill our minds, we will be pulled away from Him little by little without even realizing it. The enemy knows this. He knows that if he can distract us in the morning, he can weaken us for the rest of the day. He knows that if he can fill our hearts with the wrong things before we even step out the door, he can keep us from walking in the fullness of God's power. And that is why we must be intentional. We must guard our mornings. We must be careful about what we allow into our hearts first thing in the day. So I ask you, how are you starting your mornings? Are you waking up with gratitude, or are you filling your heart with complaints? Are you setting your mind on God, or are you letting the world dictate your thoughts? The choice is ours. Every morning we have a decision to make. We can choose to begin our day with faith, with prayer, with thanksgiving, or we can choose to begin it with doubt, with distractions, with negativity. But one thing is certain, how we start our mornings will determine how we live our days. If we want to walk in the power of God, if we want to experience His peace, if we want to live in His presence, it begins the moment we open our eyes. Let us be a people who wake up and seek God first. Let us be a people who start our day with worship, with thanksgiving, with faith, because when we do, we will see His hand at work in ways we never imagined. We will walk in His strength, in His wisdom, in His joy. And no matter what the day brings, we will know that we are held by the One who never fails. Every morning, God gives us the gift of a new day, a fresh start, another opportunity to walk with Him, to trust Him, to seek Him. But what we do with those first moments of the day matters. The way we begin sets the tone for everything that follows. And too often, instead of turning to God, we allow our mornings to be shaped by habits that push us further from Him. We wake up and neglect prayer. We fill our hearts with complaints. We allow the world to take priority over the one who should come first. One of the greatest mistakes we make is waking up and failing to acknowledge God. We rush into the day thinking about our tasks, our responsibilities, our problems, but we do not stop to pray. We do not take time to thank Him for another day of life. We do not seek His wisdom before we make decisions. And without realizing it, we step into the world unarmed, unprepared, and disconnected from the very one who sustains us. God desires a relationship with us. He does not need our prayers, but He longs for them. He is not distant, waiting for us to earn His attention. He is near, waiting for us to turn to Him. And when we begin our day without Him, we are not just missing out on His blessings, we are choosing to walk in our own strength rather than His. Think about a child who wakes up and walks past his father without a word. The father is standing there, arms open, waiting to embrace him, waiting to guide him, waiting to share in his joy. But the child keeps walking, distracted by other things. My friends, this is what so many of us do to God. He is waiting for us each morning. He is ready to speak to us, to fill us with peace, to direct our steps. But if we do not acknowledge Him, if we do not seek Him first, we miss the fullness of what He has for us. There is another habit that turns our hearts away from God, beginning the day with complaints. How often do we wake up and the first thing we do is grumble? We complain about how tired we are. We complain about the challenges ahead. We complain about what we lack. Instead of praising God for a new day, we fill our hearts with negativity. Complaining is a sign of a heart that is not fully trusting in God. It reveals that we are more focused on our problems than on His promises. And when we live with a spirit of complaint, we are telling God that what He has given us is not enough. That the breath in our lungs, the roof over our heads, the food on our tables, these things are not sufficient. But my friends, everything we have is a gift from Him. And the Bible tells us to give thanks in all circumstances. Gratitude is powerful. It is an act of faith. When we choose to thank God instead of complain, we are saying, Lord, I trust You. I trust Your plan. I trust that even if today brings challenges, You are still good. And when we live with gratitude, our hearts change. Our perspective shifts. The burdens we carry feel lighter because we know we are not carrying them alone. But there is another habit that many of us fall into, one that is just as dangerous as neglecting prayer and filling our hearts with complaints. It is the habit of prioritizing the world over God. Many wake up and the first thing they do is check their phones. They scroll through social media, they check the news, they fill their minds with distractions before they have even spoken a word to the Lord. Others wake up and immediately start worrying about work, about finances, about responsibilities. And without realizing it, they have placed these things above God. The Bible tells us to seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added to us. But when we seek everything else first, we are choosing to rely on ourselves instead of Him. We are saying that our worries, our plans, our desires are more important than His presence. And my friends, this does not please God. Imagine a man who wakes up and rushes out the door without speaking to his family. He is too busy, he has too much to do. And day after day he continues this pattern until he realizes that he has grown distant from the very people who love him. This is what happens when we put the world before God. We may not notice it at first, but over time our hearts grow cold. We become distant from Him. We begin to rely on our own strength, and soon we find ourselves exhausted, anxious, and spiritually empty. But it does not have to be this way. God is always waiting. His mercies are new every morning. No matter how many times we have neglected Him, no matter how many mornings we have chosen the world over Him, He is always ready to welcome us back. All it takes is one decision: to seek Him first. When we wake up and pray, we invite His presence into our day. When we choose gratitude instead of complaining, we open our hearts to His joy. When we put Him before the world, we walk in His peace. And my friends, there is no greater way to live. So I ask you, how will you start your morning tomorrow? Will you wake up and rush into the day without acknowledging God? Will you fill your heart with complaints instead of thanksgiving? Will you put the world before Him? Or will you choose a different way? The choice is ours. But one thing is certain: when we seek Him first, He will guide us. He will strengthen us. He will fill our hearts with peace. And no matter what the day brings, we will know that we are walking with the one who never fails. Every morning, God grants us a new beginning, a fresh opportunity to draw near to Him, to seek His presence, and to live according to His will. But how we begin the day determines how we will walk through it. The habits we cultivate in the morning set the tone for everything that follows. If we fail to start the day in the right way, we open the door to confusion, frustration, and temptation. But if we seek God first, we will walk in His strength, His wisdom, and His peace. The first thing many of us do in the morning is wake up and rush into the day without prayer. We rise thinking about our tasks, our responsibilities, our problems, and we move forward without taking a moment to acknowledge the one who gave us life. We forget that we are not meant to walk this path alone, that we are not strong enough on our own, that we need His guidance. Prayer is not just a religious duty. It is our lifeline. It is our connection to the Creator. It is where we surrender our burdens and receive His peace. And yet, so often, we neglect it. Think about a child who wakes up in the morning and never speaks to his father. He goes about his day making his own choices, struggling through his problems, and never once turns to the one who loves him, the one who has wisdom and strength beyond his own. That is what we do when we begin the day without prayer. God is waiting. He is always near. He longs to hear from us, to lead us, to fill us with His presence. But if we do not seek Him, we will miss the blessings He has prepared for us. Another habit that separates us from God is waking up with a heart full of complaints instead of gratitude. How many of us open our eyes and immediately focus on what we lack? We think about our struggles, our worries, our frustrations. We grumble about our responsibilities, about our hardships, about what did not go our way. And without realizing it, we start the day with negativity rather than thanksgiving. Complaining is not just a small habit, it is a dangerous mindset. It blinds us to God's goodness. It makes us forget His faithfulness. It turns our hearts away from Him. The Israelites in the wilderness had seen God's power. He had parted the Red Sea, provided manna from heaven, led them with fire and cloud, and yet they still complained. They still doubted. They still focused on what they didn't have instead of what God had already done. And because of their complaining, they wandered for 40 years instead of stepping into the promise He had prepared for them. We must not make the same mistake. The Bible tells us to give thanks in all circumstances, to rejoice always, to focus on what is pure, lovely, and good. Gratitude is not just about feeling thankful. It is a choice, a discipline, a weapon against the enemy's lies. When we wake up and choose to thank God instead of complain, we shift our focus from our problems to His promises. We remind ourselves that He is still in control, that He is still working, that He is still faithful. And when we live with gratitude, our hearts are filled with His joy. But many of us allow something else to take priority over God. Each morning we wake up and fill our minds with the world before we have filled our hearts with His truth. We reach for our phones before we reach for the Bible. We check the news before we seek His presence. We let distractions and entertainment shape our thoughts before we have allowed Him to speak. And in doing so, we start the day spiritually empty. What we put into our hearts in the morning determines the course of our day. If we fill our minds with negativity, we will walk in negativity. If we consume things that promote fear, doubt, and sin, our thoughts will reflect those things. But if we fill our minds with His Word, if we begin the day in prayer, in worship, in seeking His truth, we will walk in His peace. There is a reason the Bible tells us to meditate on His Word day and night. There is a reason we are called to fix our eyes on what is eternal, not on what is temporary. Because what we focus on, we become. If we start the day with God, our steps will be directed by Him. But if we start the day with distractions, we will be pulled away from Him without even realizing it. And perhaps the greatest mistake of all is waking up and thinking we can walk through the day in our own strength. Too many of us believe that we can handle life on our own, that we are strong enough, wise enough, capable enough to navigate the day without fully relying on Him. We go about our business, make our plans, face our struggles, and only when we are overwhelmed, only when we reach the end of ourselves, do we turn to God. But, my friends, we were never meant to carry the weight of life alone. God never intended for us to rely on our own strength. He calls us to surrender, to trust, to depend on Him in all things. When we try to do it on our own, we will always fall short. We will always struggle. We will always find ourselves weary and burdened. But when we wake up and surrender our day to Him, when we acknowledge that we need His guidance, His provision, His wisdom, He will lead us. He will strengthen us. He will equip us for every challenge we face. So I ask you, how will you start your morning tomorrow? Will you wake up and rush into the day without prayer? Will you fill your heart with complaints instead of thanksgiving? Will you put the world before God? Will you try to handle life on your own instead of surrendering it to Him? Or will you choose a better way? Will you seek Him first? Will you wake up with gratitude, with faith, with a heart set on Him? Because when we do, everything changes. Our burdens are lighter, our steps are firmer, our peace is deeper, and no matter what the day brings, we will know that we do not walk alone. We walk with the one who never fails, the one who never leaves, the one who holds our lives in His hands. When we wake up each morning, we are given a choice. We can begin the day with worry, distractions, and self-reliance, or we can choose to seek God first, to trust Him, to walk in His presence. The habits we cultivate in the morning shape the course of our lives. If we neglect prayer, we step into the day unprepared. If we fill our hearts with complaints, we close our eyes to His blessings. If we prioritize the world over Him, we drift further from His truth. And if we rely on our own strength, we will always come up short. But when we seek Him first, when we wake up in prayer, in gratitude in His Word, and in full surrender, We walk in His peace. We carry His joy. We face challenges with His strength. We are not shaken by the trials of the day because we know who holds our future. So let us choose wisely. Let us make every morning a time of devotion, a time of faith, a time of drawing near to the one who gives us life. And when we do, we will see His hand guiding us, His love sustaining us, and His power working through us in ways we never imagined.